What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 778. My name is Marshall, one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Las Vegas, Nevada, it's Paul Cheon. Paul, welcome back on the show. It's great to see you.
Yeah, no, it's good to be back. I've done a whole bunch of Foundations draft and very excited to kind of share what I've learned.
Yeah, and we've got a lot to share today. We're going to be doing our format overview for Foundations. This is what we used to call our first impression show, but we've had the set, it just goes so fast these days that calling it first impressions felt a little bit out of date. So we changed it to format overview because we do know quite a bit about the format already, and we're going to be sharing that with you today. Before we do, I want to say thank you to everybody who supports us on Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. And if you're getting something out of the show and if you appreciate it, that's a place you can go to support us directly. If you do, you get a thank you card and a limited resources sticker in the mail, no matter what level you sign up for. We're also supported by Ultimate Guard. That's the place to go for all of your card protection needs. You've got cards, you've got decks, you've got your collection. And you need to protect those cards. They're valuable. And especially if you're going to be playing, right? Like, shuffling cards and stuff is a very easy way to damage them. You'll need sleeves. You'll need a deck box. And you can find all that kind of stuff at ultimateguard.com to check out their full range of products. And if you want to pick up something, you can go to your favorite local game store or your favorite online retailer. Thank you, Ultimate Guard. We do appreciate it. Let's see, Paul. Let's see how quick our patrons are. I did a refresh for the Patreon question of the week thread about 2 minutes before we started the show. And yeah, we've already got like 6 questions in there. All right, here's a good one. Vlad says, how is Paul going to steal Luis's thunder on the show?
By just preaching good basic Magic fundamentals instead of playing nonsense garbage cards that likely loses you more games than wins you games.
All right. I like that. Let's answer another question. This one comes from Ian, who says, let me do this. Yeah, there we go. With Cube Worlds being one of the highlights of this year, is there anything you would want changed if this was to become a yearly event in the future? That's a really interesting question. There was a few things that stood out. Ian's referring to the Ultimate Guard live Cube event, that I got to cover with Reed. That happened kind of right after Worlds coverage. And this was the event where they qualified through Magic Online. And then you got to draft the vintage cube and actually just straight up keep the cards and then also play for the rest of the cards that weren't drafted. So it really was a highlight of the year. A couple of things that I would want to see changed. Well, I don't know if I'd want to see changed, but I'd want to at least have it revisited. One of them was qualification method. There was some weird stuff going on with that event, and I just want to make sure that there was a kind of a verification process around getting qualified on Magic Online for an event like this that has a little bit of a different qualification style. I really liked that style, by the way, but normally you think, okay, I need to win a tournament and then I'll qualify for this event. This had a much different kind of a funnel type situation where you needed to win a draft to qualify for the next stage. Then you needed to win that to qualify for the next thing. Then you needed to win that to get your seat. And I felt like it opened the door for some shenanigans there. So I would probably revisit that part. And then the other part was there was a good amount of discussion behind the scenes. I happen to be in the meetings for those about how to distribute. This is a really interesting question if you take it upon yourself to actually be the person to make this decision. So there's 540 cards in the cube, but you only draft 360 of them. And the whole point of this event is to give away all of those cards. So after the 8 players are done with their draft, there's 180 cards sitting there that are, not going to be played in the event, and those need to go to the players. And the question becomes, how do you distribute them? What was ultimately decided for this event was that the players would play out 3 rounds of like kind of round robin-ish, where everybody would be ranked by the end, number 1 through number 8. And number 1 through 8 got to pick one card from the remaining cards in the pool in that order. and then all the rest, so there's 172 cards left, go to the first place finisher. That was what was decided for the event. I thought that was totally reasonable, and it worked. But, there were other ideas thrown around behind the scenes. Like, for example, one cool idea was to make booster packs out of the rest. And by the way, you can combine any of these. Like, you could draft the top 8 cards and then make booster packs out of the rest or whatever. But anyway, you make booster packs out of the rest. And so, like, for the quarterfinal round, you would be playing for, like, say, a booster pack, or maybe it'd be 2, who knows? Like, you'd be distributing these and do more of them as you go further into the tournament. And if you win your round, you get that booster, and it's just sitting there, right? So, like, you can look over, there could be anything, there could be a Mox in there, whatever. And so if you win your round, you get to open your booster on camera, because this, of course, was a televised event. So there's a lot of thought given to how does it appeal to the viewer, as well as it exciting to watch. And so you'd get to watch the person open up their booster and see what they got. And then if you made it to the semis, you might be playing for 3 or 4 boosters. And then the last round, there could be a pile of them sitting there. So that felt like it had a little bit more meat on the bone as well, though I did feel, that where it landed was okay. It was a really cool event.
That does make each round just more exciting, right? After each round, you get to see what you actually won. So there's just a little more on the line. Obviously, there's just a lot on the line in general, because you're incentivized to just win and get the piece of power or Lotus if that hasn't been picked or whatever. Right. But the booster pack angle sounds pretty fun. Yeah.
The one caveat that I threw in there, and I think that they had agreed, and again, we didn't end up going the booster pack route, but was that if the Lotus is not opened in a pack, if it's open in a pack, then that person gets it, and that's fine. And that's great and that ended up happening, and it was a fun moment on camera. But if it had been in the other part of the cards, I just felt like the winner should get it.
Sure. Yeah.
It just would have felt so weird if it just went to some like random quarterfinal match or whatever.
Of course.
Yeah. So that would have been the thing. All right. Thanks for the question. For the questions there, we will be answering one of those every single week. Okay, Paul, we're going to do a couple of Crack-A-Packs here. We love to start off the format overview with Crack-A-Packs, because it'll give you and I a good chance to kind of dive in to the type of picks that we've been making and what's been working, what's been not, and what's on our radar, and then start to get those corrections going too. It's easy in the early stages of a format like this to get a little bit, to maybe go down a rabbit hole that by the end of the format, you're like, yeah, no. I remember, for the last set, Luis had drafted blue-red a number of times, the blue-red rooms deck, and he liked it, but also that was when nobody knew anything. And so, you're kind of into lower rankings, and like, you can get away with a lot more. But, even by the early stages of the format, he had kind of abandoned that deck because it ended up being one of the worst ones. So let's see where we're at here. Our first card up. I'm not going to do the foils for these. I don't know why it puts them in. I kind of just don't trust it. So we're going to do Uncharted Voyage as our first card. I hope that I didn't just sidewinder Jeff with the pack that I chose. Uncharted Voyage. This is 3 and a blue for an instant at common. And this is the one that puts the target creature's owner puts on the top or bottom of their library, and you get to surveil 1.
Yeah, so this is just a really, really solid common. And anytime this effect is printed, it's just always going to be good. Just if synergies or no synergies, this is just the classic 4 mana instant that puts something on top or bottom has always been nice. But the fact that you also add Surveil on top of this is just a really, really solid card. Obviously, maybe you don't want to be first picking this card, but I'm very happy playing this card in my decks.
Yeah, same. The only restriction is that it costs 4 mana, so you don't want to get 5 of these or whatever. But I mean, it is a removal spell, and it has a little bit of extra utility beyond being just the normal removal spell. The 2 things that come to mind that you can try to take advantage of with Uncharted Voyage are, one, the obvious one is that it just straight up kills tokens. So if it's token, it's just gone. But the other one that does come up occasionally are formats that have Evolving Wilds in it. You do have to be really careful. I definitely got somebody with this where they played their bomb rare, and they didn't crack an Evolving Wilds, or they played one the next turn and then cracked it. And I just waited. And I had to take a hit or whatever. But once they cracked the Evolving Wilds, I just did Uncharted Voyage. And now their bomb rare is just going to be shuffled back in, regardless of whether they put it on top or bottom. And that's a nice way to turn this from a, removal spell in the sense that it takes the thing off the board and kind of bricks their next draw step into a your creature's gone type deal.
Yeah, there's a couple of different things. Because there's a lot of tricky blue commons in the set, when you specifically play against blue, you have to sequence your spells in a certain way. And that point that you made is a really important one. Oftentimes, the natural thing to do is crack your Evolving Wilds at the end of your opponent's turn. But if your opponent's playing a blue deck and they're about to hit land number 4, just crack your Evolving Wilds. Like, yes, you're hiding some information, but it's not really that important. You know what's important? Getting your 3-mana rare creature forever exiled or shuffled back into your deck. So Just do that. Of course, another card is a card like Refute. If your opponent can have Refute or a counter spell available, just make sure that you play your removal spells on your turn. If you absolutely need to kill a creature, don't let them untap and give them the opportunity to counter your spell.
Speaking of Refute, that's our next card. 1 blue, instant, counter target spell, and then you get to loot, draw a card, discard a card. It's been really good.
Yeah, it's actually insane how normally this effect, cancel, is just okay. You don't want too many of this. It's kind of hard to cast, but you just add anything to cancel, and all of a sudden it's like actually good.
Right.
And in this instance, this card is great, right? We've seen iterations of this in the past. We've seen dissolve, right? Counter target spell, scry 1. Looting is better. And this card also keys off of, there's a light draw card synergy theme that exists in the
card.
Draw an extra card thing. So that also works. Doesn't work super well just because oftentimes you're countering spells on your opponent's turn, so you're not drawing a second card. But this is just a really solid card, and actually one of the top blue commons in the set, which is crazy. You would never expect a blue counter spell to be one of the top commons, but I think this is a card that has one of the highest win rates in the format, and that's not something that you would expect coming into a set.
Not at all. The combination of the speed of the format, which we'll talk about after we do our Crack-a-Packs, and the loot being a legitimate writer. I mean, that is an absolute extra thing that you're getting that really matters. And, we mentioned the draw a second card in a turn, and there's also, again, these are more lighter themes, but there's also a threshold sub-theme as well that this helps with. And by the way, none of those are like counting the fact that just straight up looting is good. Like you don't need it doesn't need to be a mechanic, that is supported. Like looting cards, getting rid of extra lands, finding the spell you need is just powerful in and of itself. So Refute's been excellent, that's kind of I like saying that, that's a good thing. Next is Broken Wings. 2 and a green, instant, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. Are you on the I can main deck this, or are you on the I'm not going to main deck this?
No, I usually just treat this as kind of a sideboard effect. There's just not that many artifacts and enchantments that exist in this format. So I think an effect like this might have had a little more applications in Duskmourn. But here, even a card like Reclamation Sage, I'm just not that high on. There's just not that many targets.
Yeah. Broken Wings is funny because it's actually the number one mode is destroy target creature with flying, because there are many of them, and the best archetypes have a lot of creatures with flying. So if you do end up against like an Esper, any deck that uses 2 colors out of Esper, you're probably going to find a decent target for that. And then you may even find like an enchantment to blow up or something, but I haven't been main decking it either. Green needs some help, and this isn't the help it needs. Next is Squad Rallier. This is the 3 and a white, 3/4, and you can pay 2 and a white to look at the top 4 cards of your library and reveal a creature card with power 2 or less and put it into your hand.
So I've actually been very pleasantly surprised with this card.
Really?
When I first looked at this card, I just thought, okay, 4 mana for a 3/4. It's a little bit slow, but I have actually really been enjoying this card as a top end creature to play in kind of my black-white decks, because oftentimes in your black-white decks, you just have a ton of targets. If you're playing a deck that's got like 10 creatures that you can hit with this card, which is not uncommon in black-white, this blocks well enough and just takes over the late game and gives you that mana sink where I am okay playing a copy of this card in most of my white decks that have the appropriate targets. Now, me liking this card doesn't mean it's a card that I'm happy first picking, but just saying that I definitely disrespected this card when it first came out.
Same.
And then after playing with it a few times, it's won me several games just by itself.
Okay, yeah, no, I might need to come up on it then, because I still look at it as just, like, I look at it as a D. You know, like, occasionally it makes the cut, but I don't want it to. Like, it'll be one of the first cards I'll pull out. You know, just 4 mana plus an extra 3. Like, all the pieces are there, but it just looks slow. Right. It looks like a clunker. The one thing I do like about it design wise is that you get the 4 mana, play it, 5, you know, hit your 5th mana, activate it, probably be able to play the thing you found with it. Like that's pretty cool. Like that's a nice sequence. Next is Axguard Cavalry. That's the one in a red 2/2 that you can tap to give a creature haste. Meh.
Yeah. Exactly. This is my D card, so.
For sure. I mean, you know, red has a lot of mostly interchangeable mediocre 2-drops, and this is one of them. That's about it. Next is Macabre Waltz. This is the 1 in a black sorcery. Return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand, and then discard a card. Where are you at on Macabre Waltz?
I'm not the biggest fan of this card. If I do draft kind of a grindy sacrifice deck, this is okay to have in your deck. There's a couple of recursion effects in this format. There's also the Vampire Soulcaller, which is a 5 mana 3/2 flyer that can't block and get something back. And, you know, both of them kind of have their ups and downs. The 5-drop, if you're playing a slower deck, you don't really want to play it because it can't block. But if you're grinding people out and you have a relatively low curve and you expect to trade a lot of creatures early on, then it's something that you can play as kind of a 23rd card as a way to kind of get a little extra value in the late game, but not really excited to take it first.
That's where I have it, is in that 23rd card slot. Like, I'll run one. Yeah, but it has to be in the right circumstances, and it's never exciting to do so. Right. Next is Fake Your Own Death. This is the 1 in a black instant until end of turn. Target creature gets +2/+0 and gains whenever this creature dies. Return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control, and you create a treasure token. I don't think I've even cast this card in the format yet. Should I be paying more attention to this card, or is it just kind of whatever?
I believe you should. Only because there's just a lot of creatures in this format that come into play and give you an effect, or dies and gives you an effect, right? Specifically if you're in black, the sacrifice theme seems to be pretty well supported there. And when you have cards like Infestation Sage, Burglar Rat, Helpful Hunter, there's just a lot of great cheap things where if you cast Fake Your Own Death, you just get so much value out of that exchange. Where I'm reasonably happy playing my first copy of this card in most decks that's got 15-ish creatures, right? If you have a decent curve with a good number of creatures, I'm never taking it over a solid removal spell or anything like that. And you never really have to take this card highly anyways. It's a type of card that you get kind of late. But I just found that there's enough creatures that come into play and give you some value where this is pretty decent to have in your deck as a one of.
Yeah, I could see it. I can definitely, especially trading up like a Burglar Rat, block, Fake Your Own Death, kill your thing, get my rat back, get another trigger. Like that's a lot. And it's, these are not combinations that are difficult to put together. I think that the thing that's led me away from it a little bit is that most of the decks that I have that have those type of creatures in it are not particularly assertive. And I'm not that excited about firing this off on a blocker. I'm totally good with like attack with my rat. Okay, you block. But a lot of times they just go, right. I'll just take it, So I found it maybe a little tricky, but yeah, there are a lot of common cards that you play every single draft that this would work with. So maybe I'll bump it up a little. Uncommons next. I still, Luis said he actually would play. Like, I kind of pressed him on whether he'd play this next card, and he said yes. I don't know if I believe him. It's Hitotsugu's Second Right. That's the 3 in a red instant.
Of course he would.
If target player has exactly 10 life, then this does 10 damage to them. It still just seems like a meme to me. Like, I get it that if you have it in your opening hand, you may be able to craft the game to kind of steal it. And this is powerful in that way. But it just feels like every other scenario, it's not.
This is the ultimate Luis card. I mean, the first time I ever met Luis in person, he drafted a reverse Descend's control deck where you could mana burn back in the day. So he would mana burn down to 1, then cast reverse Descend's, which is an 8-mana sorcery that swaps life totals. So he just likes nonsense like that. So it's not surprising to me that he likes a card like this. But at the same time, this is a card I don't even register this as a card. So I just don't ever take it. So if somebody else wants to live their best life and has some firebrand archers and other ways to kind of dink and dunk your opponent, get some chip damage and get them down to 10 and finish them off that way, sure. But what about the times where this just sits in your hand? And let me tell you, 80% of the time, this is going to be basically just not a card in your hand. So you just don't want to play cards like that in your deck in most instances. So this is just, for me, it's an F. So I'm just never taking this card.
Yeah, it's funny. I just looked it up. So if we just distill everything down to game in hand win rate,
oh, yeah,
which isn't really that is our shortcut. Yeah. It's 55.7. Okay, that has it higher than cards like Strongbox Raider, the 5/2, which is decent. Brazen Scourge, the 3/3 haste. Some okay cards, right? But the sample size is absolutely hilarious. So the opening hand percentage, for example, just game played win rate, whatever. These are like raw numbers. So the opening hand, for example. So if I just go down, I'm not going to name the cards, but it's 7,700, 6,400, 8,000, 7,800, 6,400. And then we get to Hideseku's second right. It's 496.
Yeah, those are just all decks that Luis has piloted.
Exactly. Basically. I'm like, this is Luis's exact, and then the next one's 6,000 again. It's just like, so yeah, sample size very low on Hidetsuga's second right. But I don't know. I don't believe him. Like, I tried to press him and say, are you actually taking and playing this? And he said, I think I might, which maybe I should just believe that he would.
Yeah. I mean, let's just put it this way. There's also a stat here for how often this card makes it into your deck. It is played in 8% of decks that draft the card. Okay. So yes, maybe there is a very corner case scenario where you can make this to be somewhat playable. So basically the idea is you get this 12th or 13th pick, and then you end up with a somewhat aggressive black-red deck or blue-red tempo deck. You've got a lot of various ways to deal 1 damage, and then maybe you can kind of squeeze this one into your deck, right? I can see that instance, but I'm certainly not taking this early and trying to find a way to draft a deck around it.
Yeah, and I want a bunch of refutes and stuff so I can dump this stupid card if that play is not happening.
Exactly.
Next is Fire Spitter Whelp. This is the 2 and a red 2/2 flyer, and whenever you cast a non-creature or dragon spell, the Whelp does 1 damage to each opponent.
So I haven't really been... Well, first of all, the blue-red spell, because this is a card that wants to go into the blue-red spells archetype, right? Yeah. It's just kind of 3 mana 2/2. I'm going to curve out and just cast a million spells and just kind of burn you down. The issue is just the body. The 3 just... And we'll probably get to this later, but just spending more than 2 mana for a creature that has 2 toughness in this format is not something that you want to be, because 2 of the premier commons in the set are Stab and Burst Lightning. And so just a 3 mana, if this was a 1/3 flyer, it would be significantly better, for example.
Definitely.
But because of the fact that it's just a Windrake, a 3 mana 2/2 flyer with a nice ability, it's certainly a card that I would play in my blue-red decks, but outside of that, not super interested in this.
Yeah, I've been on a little bit of a blue-red. I've been experimenting, let's just say. Sure. And I'll tell you that Fire Spitter Whelp is not the way. It's not that it's terrible. I think your description of it was accurate. It's like you can throw it in there, but never, ever prioritize it. It's basically Firebrand Archer that has 1 more toughness that's not that relevant, and the fact that it's a 2/2 flyer isn't that relevant. You want much different types of payoffs for this deck than Fire Spitter Whelp. So it doesn't fit perfectly in its natural home, and you'd have to, it's an uncommon. You're just not going to play it that much. Next is Good Fortune Unicorn. That's the 1 green white 2/2, and whenever another creature you control enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. How have you been on green white?
Not the biggest fan. I think I had one trophy deck where it was super open. I got the Anthem. I had lots of ways to go wide with multiple Prideful Parents and this Unicorn. And that's a situation where this card, it can be okay.
Yeah.
But this kind of suffers from the same problem as the previous card that we discussed, where it is a 3-mana 2/2. When you play it on turn 3, it's a pretty weak body. It's very, very easy and efficient to kill. And there's just not a ton of ways to go wide. So if you just don't follow this up with a way to make multiple creatures, you're not getting a ton of value. Like, you need to be able to basically play this and then play 2 creatures to be happy.
Yes.
Right? Because if you play this on turn 3 and then follow it up with a 4-drop, then you spend 3 mana to get 3 power and 3 toughness worth of stats, but it was delayed. Right? So you need to kind of be able to follow this up. So, it looks really exciting. But I actually think this is kind of one of those cards that people take highly, but probably shouldn't.
I agree. It unfortunately doesn't fit the format. It is. There's not much to complain about as a card, but what you just said. You've paid 3 mana for a 2/2. If you get the trigger, you've played 3 mana for 3, power and toughness worth of stats. But it's a vulnerable 3 mana, and it's also it's a gold card. Like, you don't always get to just play your Good Fortune Unicorn on turn 3, even in green white. And that's tough. Those things knock it down significantly. And even though it doesn't ask much of you, right? It's like, hey, play creatures, and in green white, that's what you're going to do anyway. It does charge you a pretty steep upfront tax in gold card, low stats, need to follow it up. And then, as you pointed out, that critical 2 toughness as well. So that's a bad fit for the format. Card's okay, just bad fit.
It's fine. It compares pretty unfavorably to a lot of the other Signpost uncommons. I feel like this one could have been juiced a little bit. Maybe even just adding a point of toughness to this card would really kind of put it over the top, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, this is another one where we're doing backflips around those 2 key commons. If this was a 1/3, like, even if you said you could push it and make it a 2/3, even if they made it a 1/3, I think it would perform much better. It's just too easy. If you're going to spend 3 mana worth of gold here and they just go stab it, it's just like, you just can't win games like that consistently. Love this next card. It's Mischievous Mystic. This is the 1 and a blue 2/1 flyer. And whenever you draw your second card each turn, you get another 1/1 flyer. This is the stuff.
We talk about mythic uncommons. This is one of the mythic uncommons in the set. I already love drafting blue. It's just, I'm in my happy place. Mm-hmm. But this card is just everything that you want. This is just like a flying young pyromancer.
Yeah.
And it makes flying tokens. This card is just outrageous. My first draft, I had 2 of these, and it was just absolutely absurd. I mean, there's just nothing that we've seen in these packs that's going to top this.
No, this card's awesome. And it's definitely, and also, it's perfectly positioned in this pack because we have Refute and Uncharted Voyage. So we have a shot at wheeling like the Voyage or something like that.
Right.
So that's, where there's nothing else in this pack that would wheel anyway. So that's great. Our rare, I do wish that this type of thing would be a thing, but it's Drakuseth, Maw of Flames. It's the 4 red 7/7 flying legend. And when it attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target and then 3 damage to each of up to 2 other targets. This card's obviously obscenely powerful. You can actually get it onto the battlefield. There's enough ramp, especially in green, if you go with Llanowar Elves and what's it called? Growth from whatever, the 3 mana kicker. And you can get this thing on the battlefield. The issue is the removal's too good. Like, it never gets to turn sideways. And as Paul was pointing out with Good Fortune Unicorn, where like you pay 3 mana, they kill it for 1. Well, if you pay 7 mana, they're always going to be ahead on the exchange. And the truth is, they can get way ahead on the exchange. Uncharted Voyage, any bounce spells nasty against this. All the counter spells are good against this. The Bake into a Pie kills it and is just like, they're paying 4 mana, you're paying 7. Like, you can never win with that exchange. What's it called? The Oblivion Ring does it too. Really, really vulnerable card to have to put this much resources into. So unfortunately, it feels like this just isn't the home for it. I was kind of hoping it might be, right. It's core set, it's a big dragon, but it turns out, no, this isn't the style that you want to go for.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, it's a flashy, powerful mythic. The problem is, as you outlined, at common, just so many of the colors just have so many ways to deal with this. Blue has access to 2 bounce spells, right? And a counter spell that can deal with it. Black has 2 common removal spells that can kill it. And then white also has 2 common removal spells in the Rebuke and also the Banishing Light. So just there's just so many ways to kind of deal with this card. And you're also the thing is, when you play a 7-mana card in your deck, you want to be fairly certain that you're going to win when you play that card.
Yes.
And this is just not that, because it just doesn't have that come into play effect. And in this format, particularly with all the good removal that exists, your 7-mana play has to do something when it comes into play, and this just doesn't.
Right. I mean, it's funny because as flashy as its ability is, right, the attack ability, like you would trade all of that for just, it does 3 damage to something when it enters the battlefield. That's it. Like it doesn't,
Absolutely.
Right. Even though the other one's like, but you get 4 and 2 3s to spread out however you want. And it's like, if this card just said, little flame, toast something when it ETBs, that would have been a game changer for a card like this.
Yeah.
Also, we haven't seen it yet, but my boy, the Big Fin Bouncer, it's a nice one against this too.
Yeah, I mean, that's a small gripe that I have. I do not understand why there are 2 blue bounce spells that both cost 4 mana at common. That's just odd to me. But
yeah, it makes me happy.
It is what it is.
Okay, so Mischievous Mystic is the clear pick here. All right, let's do our next crack a pack and see what we get. Our first card up is Heir Apparent. This is the 1 and a white 2/2. And Paul, get this. You can play any number of these in your deck. However many you draft, this Heir Apparent says you can play them in your deck. So we're taking
who is this card for?
Shackles. I think it's a commander thing.
Is it?
I think
I hope so.
What is it? Relentless Rats or whatever. Like that card's like expensive now somehow, and like it's like one of those things, I think. But anyway, when it enters, you get a number of 1/1 white rabbit creature tokens equal to the number of other creatures you control named Heir Apparent. And of course, the joke that I was making is that you're allowed to play any number of cards in your limited deck anyway. So that's just a complete nothing burger. Not impressed by Heir Apparent.
Yeah. I mean, how many of these do you need to draft before you would actually play them? 4?
4.
Yeah. So it's just, don't take this because it's just so unlikely to get 4. This is very different. There have been other somewhat close iterations of this type of effect where, like there's the Legion Conquistador, right? Yeah, it's like a 3-mana 2/2. When it enters a battlefield, you search your library for another copy. That's something I'm interested in. Like, let's say this was a 2-mana 2/1 that fetched more 2/1s. Or whatever, then I would play it just to try to live the dream because you get some value. But this, you just have to naturally draw them, and the payoff is just pretty minimal. Yeah, yes. I'm not going to be taking this card.
No, Heir Apparent would not be the card. Next, there's my guy, the Big Fin Bouncer, 3 and a blue for a 3/2 Shark Pirate, and when it enters, return target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. They kind of, they shrunk it back down. It's back to just creature, and it's only creatures opponent controls. They kept it simple for this, but still, this is a good tempo play. This is my kind of card. I mean, I just got my Mana War back, by the way. I had to move. I mentioned it on the show back in summer, but I had to move like rather suddenly. And the mover, they provided a mover for me because it was because of the building, and they broke the glass on my Mana War art.
Oh,
yeah, but
I took it.
Yeah, but I took it to a frame place a couple of days ago, and they said it's going to be 3 weeks to get it fixed. I said, okay, no problem. And then they called me in 2 days.
Okay,
and they had it done, and I went in and I said, hey, they said it was going to take kind of longer. And she looked at the sheet. She's like, oh yeah, you just brought it in like 2 days ago. I'm like, yeah. She's like, well, you got lucky. So anyway, enough. Mana War's back. And it is in this set as well. Big Fin Bouncer. Where are you at on it?
It's a great card. Blue's fairly deep. Like I said, there's a little redundancy because there's also the Uncharted Voyage. I do think the Big Fin Bouncer is better just because it puts a body into play as well. So it's much nice. You can play it in a nice tempo deck, right? If you're like a Blue-White Skies deck, you play this, you can still fly over while still adding to the board, which I really like. I think it does, honestly, it just doesn't take much for any Mana War type effect. Like, at what point will you not play a Mana War type effect in limited? It's got to be really bad. It's got to be like a 5-mana 1/1 or something like that, because any Mana War effect that costs 3 or 4 mana is just going to be awesome. And Big Fin Bouncer isn't really an exception.
Axguard Cavalry is next. We talked about that one. Next is Run Away Together. That's the 1 and a blue instant. Choose 2 target creatures controlled by different players and return those creatures to their owner's hand. So for our purposes, that's one of yours and one of theirs.
Yeah, I haven't been super impressed with this card. Blue already just has 2 great bounce options, and unless there's just a ton of really great enter the battlefield effects in your deck, because that's what you want to be wanting to leverage here, because you're bouncing your creature and then you get to replay it for extra value. But I have yet to put this card in my deck. I just haven't found enough situations where I'd really want it.
Yeah, I've played it a few times. It definitely feels like a tax. Like, there are times when you could take advantage of bouncing your own creature, bounce my Big Fin Bouncer and your other thing, and your opponent's just like, oh my God, I'm never going to get to have a creature stay on the battlefield. But generally speaking, it feels like much more downside to have to bounce your own creature. You have to have one for starters. Like, this card becomes uncastable if your board's empty. And then on top of it, is it if it's a token, you're killing your own creature. If it's not, you are committing to recasting it. That might not be what you want to do. That being said, I'll run one. It's not. Yeah. It's not.
I mean, the thing is, you can it is possible to over index on bounce spells. You can just have too many of them.
Right.
And like I said, because there's already 2 premium ones, and also blue tends to be the controlling color. So oftentimes blue's got a bunch of spells. You're playing Think Twices, Refutes, and Uncharted Voyages, meaning that you're often going to be playing a blue deck with maybe 12 creatures. And if you're playing 12 creatures, then all of a sudden this card just becomes much more difficult to pull off.
Healer's Hawk is next. This has been an interesting one. This is the white 1/1 flying lifelink. It's good.
So, yeah.
It's thought it would be a little better than it has been.
Yeah. Yeah. I think part of the issue is there's not really as many good life gain payoffs as you would have initially expected. If a Johnny's Pridemate was a common, then certainly this card would be much, much better. But just the fact that there are some that exist, right? The cat lady, the cat collector or whatever.
Yeah.
Obviously that card is fantastic with the Healer's Hawk, but they're just aren't
uncommon. Yeah.
Right. And Pridemate. So those are nice, but and don't get me wrong, it's definitely still a good card if you are aggressively slanted, if you're blue-white, or actually you're just going to kind of play this in most of your decks. But I've definitely been taking them not as highly as I used to. And I feel like there are actually 2 white creatures that I prefer over the Healer's Hawk in most instances. So I prefer the Dazzling Angel, which is a 3-mana 2/3 fly. Yeah, that card's been excellent. And then also the Helpful Hunter. There's just plenty of things to do with a 1/1 body. There's just the sacrifice theme is also well supported. So I like those cards both better than the Healer's Hawk, but I'm still taking this. To me now, before I thought maybe this is a card that you should be reasonably happy taking pretty early. But now I kind of look at it as more of a middle of the pack type card that if I have enough life gain payoffs, then it's going to rise in when I take it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've come to the same conclusion, and I have to say, I'm kind of happy about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's where I think that cards like this should land, right? Like, they give you the curve boost of having a relevant 1-drop that many decks just don't have. But it shouldn't be the best card in your deck. It shouldn't be like all about hitting that 1-drop and now all of a sudden, as we've talked about with Sirkovitz in the past, where, there's formats where if you hit a 1-drop on the play or even on the draw, your win percentage can jump up like 4% off of that. Like that just feels outsized for what these cards are supposed to be doing. But it also didn't feel right when they would print a bunch of 1-drops and they were all irrelevant and never got played ever. Like, that didn't feel right. This feels like a nice middle ground where Healer's Hawk matters. It's a playable, it's a card, but it isn't like, Yeah, sorry, dude. There's a bunch of really interesting, cool cards in this pack, but you just got to take the one drop. Like you just can't. It's irreplaceable, and it's like that's not true. This card it fits into some themes, and it's fine. I like that. Speaking of 1 mana spells, Eaten Alive is next. This is the black sorcery that exiles a creature or planeswalker, and as an additional cost to cast it, you can either pay 3 and a black, or you can sacrifice a creature. It's been good.
So. Yeah, no, it's been really, really solid, mostly because this is a format that lends itself to having sacrifice fodder. Mm-hmm. You have access to Burglar Rat in black and also the Infestation Sage. Both of those cards you're really happy just sacrificing because you already kind of get something from that exchange. So having that 1 mana removal spell is really, really nice. The exile effect is also nice. And one other small thing, I don't even know if it's in this pack, but one of my favorite things to do is actually search for it with Micromancer.
Micromancer it up, bro. I was going to say the same thing, man. Totally. Because you're getting more, like this and Burst Lightning are both, upgradable to real removal spell. I mean, this just is a real removal spell, but,
right.
Burst Lightning is as well. And it goes a long way. I mean, Micromancer getting effectively 5 mana spells is a big game because it costs 4. So the next turn you can Eat Alive for full value, or you can Burst Lightning for full value, and you're killing, most things in the format. That's really impressive. That's really funny that you said that because I had that one in the queue too. Eat Alive's been good.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about red black, with what's it called? Employment. Man,
involuntary
employment,
I think.
And, and working well with that. Next is Ambush Wolf. This is the 2 and a green 4/2 flash. And when it enters, you can nab a card from a graveyard. You can exile a card from a graveyard. Mediocre, right? But it does do the things look, upside, flash can matter. Getting cards out of graveyards like Think Twice and stuff is decent. And 4 toughness 4 power on 3 mana is a sweet spot for the deck that cares about 4 powered creatures. So there's a lot to like there. Big downside to toughness. I mean, we're going to hammer on this, but This card is 3 mana that gets killed for 1 mana against like over half the decks that you face. And that is a very, very tough exchange to take. Let's just talk about it now. You mentioned the angel, the 2/3 flying angel for 3, right? And and then whenever a creature enters, you gain a life, dazzling angel or whatever it's called. Like, card's fine. Like when you read it, you're like, oh, those are good stats. Like that's a nice common. Like, okay, that's pushed or whatever. But that's like the best white common. And the reason for that is that extra point of toughness, period. Like that is why it does not die. It's evasive. It has a vaguely relevant tacked on ability. The extra life is like occasionally a thing, but really it's an evasive threat that has 3 toughness. And cards like Ambush Wolf don't fit that requirement, and they just get knocked down the ranking significantly as a result.
Yeah, I would only really be interested in taking this. I will never be happy taking this, but I would only be interested in taking something like this if I'm red-green.
Exactly.
Because red-green is the color combination that keys off of having a 4-power creature in play. So, you're playing a deck with 3 or 4 copies of the 2-mana 2/2. I think it's Courageous Goblin. I'm not sure. But it's like a 2-mana 2/2 that gets +1/+0 and Menace when you have a 4-power creature. Obviously, the ideal curve here is to play that on turn 2 and just not even using the flash effect. You just play this on turn 3 and just hit them for 3. That's kind of where what you want to be doing with this card. So, just kind of a mediocre green creature that works reasonably well when you're doing the Gruul thing.
It is funny that because I have played a decent amount of this card because I have been playing Gruul a bit. It's not that I'm like excited about it. It just seems to continually be open, and I've won at least 2 trophies with Gruul already. And so I've been like, okay, if they're just going to keep handing it to me, and this is like before I look at the numbers too, because I kind of wait for this show to really dive in. It's been really interesting to see some of the stuff. And Gruul's okay. It's a mid ground deck, I would say, but like, it is funny how often you just play Ambush Wolf like first main phase, just because you want the trigger off of the stuff. But anyway, it's just okay. Next is a card that is trying really hard to compensate for that 2 toughness issue with its Crackling Cyclops. It's the 2 and a red 0/4. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this guy gets +3/+0. And this card has been terrible. It's been so bad. I normally enjoy cards like this in the red-blue decks. I like these more than the little pingers that are trying to eat away at their life total. I like trying to give this some, cast 3 spells in one turn. It has 9 power, and then it doesn't have trample. And that's the problem. Like, if you have Balmor with this guy, it's good. If you can find some other way to jump it or do something, it can do the thing. But all the other times, it does almost nothing, and it's really bad. So, yeah, I have not found a deck, including blue-red, that wants Crackling Cyclops yet.
Yeah, just super underwhelming. The fact that you're playing a 3-mana 0/4 that requires you to have a follow-up to get and the follow-up is you get a 3/4 for one turn. That's not even all that exciting, right?
It's not.
The juice just isn't worth the squeeze when you're looking to try to play this card in your deck.
It would have been interesting if it got trample. It would
any
have
keyword.
Been, yeah.
Yeah, like reach, trample, first strike, you name it. Yeah, any of those would be interesting.
Yeah.
But just as is, there's just so many ways to kind of gum up the ground in this format. It's just here's the thing too. Imagine a scenario where they're just like they have a helpful hunter or an infestation sage, and you're like, all right, attack for 0. And you're like, well, I guess I'll block and just like force you to have a spell, but it's not even that bad if you do.
Totally.
Right. So,
yeah. Or you can just say no blocks and like make you burn all your it just never plays out the way you want. Next, Overrun. Overrun, baby.
This card used to be absurd.
It did. So how is it now? Like, is it like it, because I have definitely won games with it. I have definitely lost games to it. But this is, Overrun is one of the most archetypical, difficult cards to actually figure out how it's doing, because you only cast it if you're about to win the game with it, or put you at such a huge advantage that you effectively can't lose. And there are many times where you lose with it in your hand and never cast it.
Yeah. I mean, I will say it is a legitimate way to close out games if you are an aggressive deck. But the thing is, in order to make this card good, you kind of have to check a variety of boxes off first before you play this. You're not playing this in a mid-range green deck, right? You're playing like a deck that's looking to play just a normal game of Magic with some removal spells and 14 creatures or whatever. You need to be really creature heavy. Ideally, you have some ways to even generate tokens, whether that's Dwinnen's Elite or Prideful Parent or something along those lines, because the more tokens you produce, the more value you get out of a card like Overrun. So in a lot of instances, this will play similarly to, stuff we've seen in red or white, right? The Claws Out or the Trumpet Blast variant that exists. So in a lot of ways, it kind of plays out like that. But because it gives you also +3/+3 in trample, it more reliably actually closes out games than the other cards. So if I'm playing a deck that's super, and also it's triple green. So if I'm playing a deck that's like 10 forests minimum, maybe you got some Llanowar Elves, you're also looking to be aggressive. Yes, this card will be good in those decks, but don't just take it early and just think it's going to be a card you can easily just slot into your green deck and have it be good every single time. So I will say it's got a high ceiling if you meet all the conditions, but that's not going to happen as often as you think.
Yeah, it has a high ceiling and the lowest floor. Like the type of floor that says, I either literally can't cast this spell because the mana didn't come together, which happens all the time with triple green spells that you kind of want to hit at a certain point, or I could cast it and my opponent would say, okay, cool, I take 6 and then kill you. Like, it does nothing. So the floor is extraordinarily low on Overrun, but it does have a high ceiling. It really does. Like, there are games that are completely stalled out that realistically you weren't going to be able to get your way out of. There are games where your opponent had stabilized after you had a relatively quick start, and this just completely slams the door on the game, and there isn't another card in the set that would do that. So it's worth considering for sure. The number one thing, Paul, you mentioned it, but I'm going to reiterate, is you have to be heavy green. The mana consideration for a card like this is huge, and then also you need of course, to be a creature-centric deck, meaning, you want 15 plus creatures in your deck. So that's a lot, right? We're talking about a card with a lot of setup costs, not just in playing a bunch of creatures, but also in mana. And the setup cost extends to the board state where you need to have a situation where it either puts you to the point that you win the game when you cast it, or you put your opponent in a position where they have to effectively chump block a bunch of your stuff just to survive, and then you win the next turn. That's a lot. That's a lot of setup for a card like this. But if you do those things, it does things that other cards can't do, and that's worth it. Next is Infernal Vessel. This card's actually really annoying. It's the 2 and a black 2/1. And when it dies, if it wasn't a demon, you bring it back with 2+1/+1 counters on it, and then it becomes a demon. It's annoying. Like, this card is like, you want it to die, which is weird, right? Like, there's very few creatures that you're just like, it's a straight up upgrade if this thing somehow dies, so people will just chump with it, soak up 4 damage, and then get, upgrade their creature. And of course, you mentioned sacrifice stuff with like Eaten Alive. And this is a good card for that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think this card is just good. Like, you just play this, and your opponents you're just never going to have creature combat ever again to prevent this from turning into a 4/3. So, in instances where your opponent doesn't have a 3 toughness creature in play, you just attack every turn and they just take 2, or they trade and then you just upgrade. And then not only that, the fact that you can also use this as a way to sacrifice. Right, this is just the perfect fodder to sacrifice to Eaten Alive or the Ghoul, just anything, and then have it upgraded. You're paying 3 mana for 4/3 plus in effect, essentially. It's just really, really strong. I think I would likely consider this being the card that I take out of this pack so far, just because it doesn't look like it's super strong, because you look at it and you're like, oh, it's a 3 mana 2/1. But it's like, when you play with it, and most black decks will have ways to sacrifice, and also, when you just naturally play a game of Magic, this is just kind of a natural 2-for-1 in a lot of instances when you're blocking. Just makes this a really annoying, like you mentioned, card to play against.
Yeah. The cards I'm looking at right now are Big Fin Bouncer, Healer's Hawk, Eaten Alive, Overrun, Infernal Vessel. That's like the ones that I would even, like, all the rest are like not under consideration in any way. Yeah. Last uncommon is Ravenous Amulet. This is 2 mana for an artifact. You can pay 1 tap and sack a creature to draw a card and put a soul counter on this artifact. You can do this only at sorcery speed, and then you can pay 4 mana, tap it, and sacrifice the artifact to have each opponent lose life equal to the number of soul counters on this artifact. I have never seen this played. I've never played it, and it just seems like trash to me.
Yeah, I would say that the corner case for this would be if you drafted the Rakdos sacrifice deck with a bunch of, just things like the red sorcery involuntary employment and cards of that nature, where this actually gets to do something. It's nice. The issue with this card is you can only sacrifice at sorcery speed, right? And the fact that you can only sacrifice at sorcery speed just makes this pretty bad, in my opinion. Bro. So unless you have an unrealistic deck where you have 4 infestation sages, right? Triple burglar rat and 2 involuntary. Like, if you have one of those decks, yes, this card can be okay. But otherwise, I think this is a card that you likely just aren't going to want to play for the most part.
Yeah, too slow. Everything's okay about it. It's just too slow. I do wonder if they took the sorcery clause out, if that would actually make Ravenous Amulet like a little more.
Yeah, block, stack, draw card.
Yeah,
I think it would be playable. It would be playable in the decks where you have things to sacrifice.
Our rare is Anthem of Champions. They finally printed this very simple design in this color pair. It's green, white for an enchantment, and it says creatures you control get +1/+1.
So
not a lot to complain about there. Yeah.
Powerful effect. The only thing is it's kind of, you're taking a multicolored card first, and you are also taking a multicolored card in a color combination that's one of the weaker archetypes in the format as well. So the way that I look at a card like this in general when I draft is I am not going to generally be the first person to take this first. The way this card ends up in my deck is when I see it 5th pick.
5th pick,
right?
Baby.
yeah, when I first pick, baby.
No, fifth pick. Fifth
Oh,
pick.
fifth pick,
I was
yeah.
going to say that too. I was going to say fifth
When
is
you get
the
it,
right place.
right, because I don't want to start green white and then if green or white is cut off, all of a sudden it's a disaster and you're trying to do everything you can to kind of put this card in your deck. When if green and white aren't open, then all of a sudden your deck's just going to look pretty bad. Like a mediocre green white deck is just not going to get very many wins. But in the situation where it's clearly open and you get this card past you, then it's a great card in the deck, and you know that color combination is open. Right, then you know that you're going to get fed all the cards that you need to kind of have this card go into your deck. So I don't think it's a powerful enough card where you just slam it first pick. I think it's a good card in a green-white deck, but I don't want to start my draft green-white. So it's something that I'd be looking to pass early and then be reasonably happy taking it late when the signals are clear that I should be in this combination.
Yeah, I approach it the same way, and which by the way, in my experience, means I basically never get to play it. Because
sure,
I mean, because unless it's like third pack where people are kind of already slotted into their color pairs, most people will just be like, "Hey, it's a sweet rare, I'll just take it," and they don't really think beyond that. Like, this is cool, I'll take it, or oh, it's open, I'll take it, and so that means that it usually does go in the first 4 picks or whatever because somebody just wants it. Yeah, I like Infernal Vessel out of this pack. Yeah. Like I said, Big Fin Bouncer's kind of waving at me, Eaten Alive is over there, but I would take the Vessel. I think that's the most powerful card.
Yeah. I think you can't go really wrong with either the removal spell Infernal Vessel or the Big Fin Bouncer. Any of those is fine. A Healer's Hawk I like just a little bit less, just because it can be potentially the best bug common in your deck, right? But you have to kind of have those payoffs, and if you don't, then it like shoots down to the 5th or 6th best common in white. So that's a much lower floor. Whereas if you take something like Infernal Vessel, it will always be pretty solid in your deck. Big Fin Bouncer will always be good. Eaten Alive, unless you somehow don't find anything to sacrifice, it will still always be a pretty solid removal spell.
That's right. Okay, great stuff on the Kraken packs. Let's move on to some of our big picture stuff here for the format overview. I'll just start throwing some questions out, Paul, and we'll kind of pick and choose what routes we want to go down. How fast has the format felt?
The format has definitely felt a little bit slower than the formats that we've seen in recent memory, right? We're talking about Duskmourn, Murders at Kurlov Manor, right? That was a pretty fast set. And this one has felt a little bit slower where you can play cards like Think Twice. There are certain formats where Think Twice just can't make it into your deck, right? Just because your opponent's going 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, kill you. That doesn't necessarily feel like the case here. There are aggressive archetypes that exist, and you still need to respect the curve. You still need to, this is just modern Magic. Like, you have to respect 2-drop, 3-drop, combat trick, double spell, get you. Like, you need to make sure you draft interaction in 2-drops. But it does feel like you have a little bit more breathing room to explore blue a little bit more, play some of those counter spells, maybe play some 5-drops in your deck.
For sure. And I did check out the format speed on 17 lands. Now, we're a little early, to be clear. Like, this is the type of thing that I'd rather check when we're like a month and a half into the format where it's really settled and we kind of know. But that your impression is exactly what is shown here. It is not in the fastest tier. Okay, I'm leaving Phyrexia Albury 1 off because it's its own particular terrible beast. But there's a grouping of sets, more recent sets. Bloomborough, for example, is the next fastest. Then Woe, DSK, and LTR are both in there, as well as LCI. They're kind of grouped in this like 8.7, 8.8 turns to finish the game type thing. And then there's another chunk beyond that are more in the 8.9 to 9 range. Some, Mom is in there, for example, and Foundations is in there too. So this is coming up on 9 turns a game or so, versus the faster ones being down in the 8.7, 8.8 range. So this actually is that half a step slower. One really important thing though, Paul, is that especially since we've actually seen some variance in this lately, we had that run for a year and a half where it was like every set was in that the top 5 fastest sets were the 5 sets that were just released. Like, it was getting ridiculous. But one of the things that I had been really focusing on, because I don't think that, raw speed of the format is the only thing. And I don't think it's necessarily bad if a format is fast, as long as there's like interesting things going on and it isn't squeezing out, like groupings of archetypes, right? Like, we've seen green, blue, green, black, those little bit less defined, little bit slower. Some of the red, blue style decks consistently get squeezed out in favor of like white or white, red based archetypes. That hasn't happened in the last few sets. Like, we got to play blue, green. It was actually one of the better decks, in like 2 of the last 3 sets. So we've seen that correction. So where I've been actually focusing, instead of speed of the format, is the game win rate on the play. So that's, a measure of how much advantage you get by simply winning the die roll at the beginning of the match. And once again, Phyrexia Alba will be 1, and Bloomborough, and LCI, and MOM, and MKM. I'm not counting MH3, by the way. I'm just counting like regular sets. Those are all of those are in a horrible grouping where they're past 53%.
Okay.
And coming up on 53.5% for all of those. So all you have to do is win the die roll and you're getting over 3%. And that might not sound like much, but if you've ever seen the win rate that the casino needs for blackjack or any table game, right? To build what you see where Paul lives now in Vegas, these huge, obscene buildings, just all of that money. Well, that came from the players' pockets, and it came off of 53% win rates. Like, you do not need much to make that a thing. And just winning the die roll gets you that. But in Foundations, it's 51.
That's awesome.
And there is no perfect answer, right? For this, they've tried, and it's just, the truth is that in almost all sets, there are actually, by the way, 2 exceptions for where you're actually better off to lose the die roll, M20 and RNA. But in basically all cases, being on the play is going to be an advantage. But that's fine. If it's 51%, that's fine. Like, you can live with that. That is within the realm of, you can't make these numbers perfect. And that's where Foundations is. So I think that has a big effect on how the format feels versus the numbers associated with how long the game actually goes.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think, in an ideal world, you kind of want that number to be 50-50, right? It's just like, that's probably what Richard Garfield intended, right? When he was like, play and draw, I'll give you that extra card. Hopefully that makes up for the fact that you're on the draw.
Exactly.
And obviously when something is pushed to the point where it's 53%, particularly because many of our viewers likely are playing through Arena and you're just playing a lot of best of one, because that's one of my main ways to approach it. It is rough. It is rough. And this one, I think there's a couple of factors. Number one, we talked about it before. The fact that you have access to 2 premium 1-mana removal spells means that when you're on the draw, you are not punished as much. Even if your opponent does have the turn 1 Healer's Hawk, you still have the Stab or the Burst Lightning available to match your opponent's plays. Additionally, you have lots of great cheap things that are great at blocking. You have cards like the Infestation Sage, the Burglar Rat, and the Helpful Hunter that let you just kind of chump block, not worry about things. So I think a format that has access to good, cheap removal helps mitigate the huge kind of gap between being on the play and being on the draw. When people are just trying to run you over, if you don't have access to a shock, if there is not a shock or a Disfigure variant, then all of a sudden I bet that number shifts over to 52, maybe 52.5%.
I agree. My guess is that those 2 cards are pulling the majority of the weight for why we're able to do that. And I think if I worked at Wizards, I don't know, does the format suffer if we have access to removal that kills small creatures? Like, does it make it tangibly worse in any way, because it definitely makes it better. Like you can
Right.
definitely strong, but I would assume that it makes it better in the way that you just described, Paul. I wonder, if you could make an argument that, yeah, well, the format just gets so much worse because there's this cheap removal. It's like, anytime the answers get too good, I don't hear that many complaints.
Right.
You almost never hear anybody go, God, this format sucks. The removal's just so good.
I mean, if there was no 1 mana answer to Healer's Hawk, that card probably even goes up 0.5% win rate, right?
Totally.
It just completely shifts everything. So yeah. And the thing is, it's not like red white is a bad archetype. It's one of the better archetypes in the format. So even with the existence of these two good removal spells, you can still have a deck that can succeed because you're curving out and just trying to beat people down, and before your opponents can kind of get set up for whatever they're trying to do.
What are the colors or decks that have been working, which haven't, and how have the colors been breaking down in your experience, like from the big picture?
Personally, I have really been loving the Esper colors. So any combination, I think that, at least in my opinion, blue, black, and blue, white are among the two best archetypes. And black, white is also up there. I think those three, you can easily make the case that they're the three best archetypes in the entire format. So that's kind of where I want to be. Now, black and white at common are very, very deep. Black has access to literally the two best commons in the set. If you just look at win rate,
that's
I don't
crazy.
know even how this is. Usually black has the best removal spell in the format. That's kind of where you want to be. At least when I was in game design, they were like, all right, black needs to have the best removal spell. Well, it does. It's got Bake into a Pie and Stab, which is kind of outrageous how they have two, and they're 1 and 2.
And those are the top two commons in the set?
Those are the top two commons in the set. But then if you look at white, it's extremely deep. We're looking at a pool where Dazzling Angel, Banishing Light, Luminous Rebuke, Felidar, the 2/3... that was Felidar Savior. You have the Helpful Hunter. They're 5 of like the top 10 commons in the set. So any combination of white and black are very, very good. And blue is an extremely good support color as well, because it lets you kind of play that control game. And I have just really liked pairing blue with white or black in this format. The color that I've been really looking to avoid is green, unfortunately. The litmus test to how good your green decks are usually kind of boils down to how many Llanowar Elves you have in your deck. Llanowar Elves is the best green common in the entire set. But guess what? It's the 22nd best green, 22nd best performing common in the set. So that is a big, big miss. If somehow your best common is, you don't even have one card that cracks the top 10 in win rate, that is a huge, huge problem. So green is a color that I've usually been avoiding unless it's very clear that it's open, or unless I open a bomb rare, something like a Vivian Reed, right? If I open a Vivian Reed, you better believe I'm going to take it and try to figure it out. But if I don't, like, I'm just not going to take Bite Down over a similarly powerful card in another color ever, just based on right now how bad it's performing.
This is great. So I'm looking at the numbers right now. So there's some things that are standing out. First, the top 10, it's actually 11 because number 10 and 11 are tied. But so of those cards, 6 are white. Dazzling Angel, Helpful Hunter, Banishing Light, Luminous Rebuke, Felidar Savior, and Healer's Hawk all make the top 10. The top 2 are black, as you mentioned. There's no others in the top 10, in this case 11, that are black, but the number 1 and number 2, so they just stake their claim very, very heavy. Then you've got Burst Lightning is the only red card in sight. As Paul mentioned, there's no green cards at all. And then number 11 tied with Healer's Hawk, my boy, Big Fin Bouncer, thank you very much. And then Refute is the other blue card in the top 10, and that's coming in at number 6. Few other things that stand out. If you extend that list out a little bit further to, say, number 15 or 16, you still will not find another red or green card at that point. They're blue, black, and white. 2 other things that stand out. One of them is that even if you get down to that number 15, let's say, one of the cards, it looks like it's number, 13, 14, somewhere in that range, is Dismal Backwater.
Oh yeah, my boy.
The blue-black Gainland. Like, if that card is getting up into that range, that is a big signifier that color pair or splashing into that color pair is an important part of the format, because none of these other lands they're not even on here. Scoured Barrens is the next one, and it's a big chunk down.
Marshall,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Dismal Backwater, by the way, among top drafters, 6th best common.
That's incredible
in the set.
It's just a huge sign of two things. One, again, that color pair specifically or splashing into one or both of those colors is an important part of the format. And two, the thing that you're always talking about, Paul, that Luis is always talking about, that I'm trying to get you guys to talk about, is that your mana really matters, right? That is top players prioritizing their mana, and other players often don't. They assume that a 9/8 mana base is just fine, check the box, and off you go. But the truth is a 9/8 mana base stinks. It's just what we're usually left with. But when you have a chance, especially in current era limited formats, to use a pick on a relevant either splash or just straight up mana fixing card, it's often good to do so earlier than you think you would, because the card values are so flat, right? You never have to scrape for playables these days, ever. Like, unless you just really messed up the draft and changed colors, most of the way through pack 2 or something crazy like that, you just have to play cards that you'd rather not. That's why there's so many more D's and very few F's at the common spot, is because they're like, why? Why would we put cards at common that are just unplayable? And with the play boosters, they had fewer spots. So now, if we call a card unplayable, it means it's like 2% worse than the playable version that you wanted. There was a time where it was 10% worse, like where the card just literally did nothing in the format. And it was just like one of those rares that you're like, what are you doing here? Right. It was one of those. And there would be multiple commons like that per set, but that is way in the past now. And that means, just like in Cube Draft, it means you now have the ability to spend picks on mana fixing, because you're going to be fine on playables no matter what. And that's why I think you see, Dismal Backwater creeping up the list like that.
Yeah. And the thing with Dimir specifically, it's got kind of the biggest problem. I think Dimir is like the best archetype, or maybe top 2. Mm-hmm. The biggest problem with Dimir is 2 of their best commons are Refute and Bake into a Pie. So it's really, really important to be able to cast turn 3 Refute and also cast turn 4 Bake into a Pie. So the fact that this is a dual land, get types for blue or black, is really important. So, for example, comparing this to Evolving Wilds, which you would think it would be a nice comparable type effect, this is so much better. Like I said, among top players, this is the 6th best common. Mm-hmm. It is the best common in blue-black for top players. It has almost a 65% games in hand win rate, and it is the best absurd performing common in blue-black, whereas Evolving Wilds is sitting at 60%, right? So it's a 5% difference because of the fact that this gives you access to both blue and black, and Dimir specifically really needs to be able to play double blue and double black spells in its deck.
The last thing that stood out looking at the commons list, I mean, there's a lot of things, but one of the things was involuntary employment. It makes the top, 20 or so, right? And it's the 3rd best red common here as well. And that really, when I see those type of cards doing well, I always think Black-Red Sacrifice. Is that what's happening here?
Yeah, I mean, this is just not a card that you really want to play in any other deck. But like I mentioned, because there's 2 just good common sacrifice cards in black. You have Eaten Alive and the Ghoul, the Hungry Ghoul. So the fact that and they both cost 1 mana to use, right? So you play the involuntary employment, you get your treasure. Even on turn 4, you can steal their creature, attack, and then use the treasure to then sacrifice that for extra value. So this, and not only, and this is probably one of the most important reasons why Rakdos has such a high win rate, because red is like okay. Red has Burst Lightning, which is a premium card, but then it falls off a cliff afterwards. But then all of a sudden you get to turn a card that nobody else is taking in their deck. And if Rakdos is open, you're getting this card on the wheel. You're getting this card 8th pick. And in your Rakdos Sacrifice deck that's got multiple Eaten Alives, maybe a Vampire Gourmand, and some ghouls, this becomes just another removal spell that you can have access to in your deck that also hits your opponent on the way out. So this is a card that kind of puts Rakdos over the top, because you have, anytime you have a card that's only good in your archetype, right, it just goes a long way, because all of a sudden you get to play 4 mana, destroy target creature, and nobody else wants it.
Yeah, and that is usually the difference between, like, black-red can be good just based on pure power, but having a common threat and effect that has enough synergies with it is usually what puts like sacrifice specific decks over the top. And it looks like, I mean, maybe over the top is strong, but it puts it on the radar here for us for sure. Green. You mentioned Llanowar Elves, and then there's a kind of big gap to the next. How like, some formats, every format's going to have better colors than others, right? That's how, this, it's self-correcting. It's graded on a curve, right? So you can't have them all be good. That's not how it works. But sometimes you'll see a grouping of 4 colors and then one color that just really missed and is far, far behind. What category would you put green in initially here? Is it like we need to leave it in the rearview mirror, or is it just not quite as good as the other colors?
It's a great question.
I know it's early to hit you with this,
yeah,
but just your initial impression, at least.
Yeah, I mean, my initial impression is right now, I just kind of want to avoid green almost entirely, unless I see some signpost uncommons or rares. I'm just never taking a green common unless there's just nothing else in the pack, and it's just very obvious that that's where I need to be. And it really just starts kind of with Llanowar Elves, because then I'm going to have some direction there. But having your best common just be so much worse than anything else. For example, I'm not as high on red either, right? But red at least has a common that stands out, right? You have access to a card that has an argument to be the best common in the set. And if red was a deeper color, Burst Lightning very well would be the best common in the entire set in terms of kind of its performance, just on sheer power, it probably is the best common, right? But green just doesn't have anything like that, right? And so there needed to be some kind of outlier green creature that you look at, and you're like, oh, hey, this is and they're not going to do it, but hey, this is a 4 mana 5/5. Right. Or maybe in this instance, it's a 3 mana 3/4, so that you can have the dream of going Llanowar Elf into this 3 mana 3/4 or what have you. That's kind of something that I think needed to happen here, because right now, just green just doesn't provide you anything. Right. And not only that, it's like the only synergy that really works with green is the 4 powers matter theme. Yeah. Right. You look at green white. No. You look at blue-green. Blue-green has some sweet rares, right? I mean, if you get a Coma in your deck, maybe you can make something happen there. And then you look at black-green, which is by far the worst performing color combination in the entire set. It's at a 52.4% win rate. Compare that to blue-white, which is at a 57% win rate. So that's a 5% gap. And it's an even larger gap among top players. Among top players, it's at 55% win rate, whereas blue-black, which is the best performing archetype, is at 61.5. So that's a 6% spread. So it's just very, very clear that Morbid just doesn't work very well. And I would argue that the best Morbid deck is a black-white deck, just because green doesn't give you the sacrifice fodder either, right?
No way.
Like, how often are you making tokens off of Dwinnen's Elite? Like sometimes.
Almost never.
But in a lot of instances, you kind of just have to play this on turn 2 just as your 2-drop. It's really awkward to count this as your 2 mana play unless you have the turn 1 Llanowar Elves. Right. So you're not going to be able to live that dream. So I think right now you just basically, my thing with green, because of how weak the commons are, I'm never taking the commons. I am basically looking to see if I get a rare or a rare pass to me. And draft is obviously self-correcting to the point where if nobody touches green, yes, I'll be green, right? I mean, if you're going to pass me a snare spinner Nobody's going to do that. But if somebody's
Right.
going to pass me a snare spinner or something along those lines, yes, I'll take all the green cards because I'll know that I'll get all the felling blows and all the uncommons. But I just don't. You just, let's put it this way. I don't think it's very easy to cobble together a trophy winning deck or a deck that can go 3-0 at your FNM or go 7 wins in arena with just a pile of commons where green is one of your main colors.
Yeah. I mean, I think I want to kind of zoom in on what you said about Morbid not working. It really doesn't work. It's never worked. It's a intuitive, flavorful mechanic that just has never worked. For the most part, Morbid has been used as an enter the battlefield effect. So if a creature's died this turn type thing, they eased off on that a little bit. I thought it might actually fix it to put at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, then you get something. That is a lot easier than the one specific turn where you have to have the creature, the mana, and the creature die. Setup cost goes pretty high on that. It's still not quite enough. It's just not. Even if the first time you attack with your dumb rat and they're like, okay, I'll block it. And then you play your cares about Morbid thing after and like, haha. Well, okay, so you get a trigger. That's nice. It's fairly easy to see coming. And then after that, it's literally on the battlefield. So your opponent just gets full information about how they want to handle that situation. And I don't know. I feel maybe I'm too quick to do this, but I feel like it's time to let go of Morbid. Like if I never saw Morbid again, I would be like, that's fine. Like again, I on paper, it's kind of perfect. It's perfect for green black. It's flavorful. It's interesting. It's, hits a kind of perfect middle ground, but in practice, it's just never worked. And I feel like we have another example here of black green just kind of, they're trying to do something different than just the normal, get back stuff from the graveyard thing. And now we see it in the basement again.
Yeah, that's the thing. I feel like Morbid works, but not in black-green. That's the problem, right? The signpost uncommon tells you that you should be the Morbid deck.
Right.
But when you're looking at Morbid, the most reliable way and the best way to have agency over Morbid is by sacrificing things, right? Because it's easy to play around things that are in play that says, oh, this will trigger when something dies. But if your opponents just go, okay, I take it. I don't block.
Right.
Just attack me, I'll attack you back. That's fine. Then all of a sudden, your Morbid cards are just power, toughness, no other stats, right?
Right.
So that's kind of the issue, because I have liked Morbid when I'm very heavy black with a bunch of sacrifice things. But usually I'm pairing that with red or white, because white has access to the Helpful Hunter, which is a nice thing to sacrifice. Sometimes you can play the Prideful Parents, which also generates an extra token. What does green do for you? Right? It needs to make there needs to be maybe a 4-mana sorcery that makes 4 1/1 tokens or something. I don't know. It's just, I just don't see how it works and how it works well. So I agree. I don't, especially in black green. I don't think it was implemented the best that it could be. Like I said, I still don't mind some of the Morbid cards. For example, Tragic Banshee is good. I do like Tragic Banshee, right? Because there's enough 1 toughness things to kill. And also, I'm playing it in my black-white decks or my black-red sacrifice decks where I'm going, Eaten Alive, kill something, play my Tragic Banshee, trigger Morbid, kill something. But the black-green cards, or the green cards specifically, they didn't quite hit.
Yeah, I mean, Wardens of the Cycle is double green in its cost. You have to be green. Like you can't even consider a splash. And, I think that it is, reverse engineering it, like cards like that are a bit of a miss, right? Like Wardens of the Cycle, if you trigger Morbid, it's gain 2 life or draw a card and lose a life. Like those are good, but those aren't even pushed, right? Like that's like 2 life. Like that could have been 4 life, which is a huge difference. You're doubling the effect. It could have definitely just been draw a card. Hell, it could have been draw a card and gain a life. These are so difficult to routinely trigger. The other, I know I'm being nitpicky, but there's another thing too that I just am kind of like, really, which is that Eaten Alive is like maybe not a premier black removal card spell, but it is a common black removal spell that sees heavy play and it exiles.
Right.
And it's like,
Sure.
come on, like, come on, right? Like, I can't, like, I get it that it still sacrifices sometimes. So maybe you're still getting your Morbid trigger anyway, but like, come on, like, work with me here.
If they really wanted to put it over the top, they definitely needed a more powerful signpost uncommon at the very least. I mean, when you're if you look at Duskmourn, they really hit on the signpost uncommons, maybe a little too hard.
Right.
But they were all incredible. You're talking about Arabella, Gremlin Tamer, Oblivious Bookworm. They're all insane. Disturbing Mirth, right? They're all good. There's a pretty big spread on which ones are great and which ones are pretty bad in this one, right? We're talking about the Unicorn being pretty mediocre, the Black-Green one being pretty mediocre, and then you have other ones. Balmor is great if you're drafting kind of the blue-red deck. The Empyrean Eagle is great in the blue-white deck. So there does seem to be kind of a pretty big gap in power level between some of the signposts. I wish that they were a little bit closer.
Yeah. The interesting thing too, again, we're down a rabbit hole here, but that's what podcasts are for, is that, in Duskmourn, they did take a different approach where they did 2 signpost uncommons per color. I kind of feel like that was a win. Right? Because like it gives them, like, if you miss like they did with Wardens of the Cycle, you've got maybe like a backup plan.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
As it turned out, the hits on the ones that they did, they kind of didn't miss. There was only, like Skull Snap Nuisance was kind of mediocre, right? The 2 in green white were bad, but that was because of green white. The cards themselves were actually very strong and quite good. I guess the blue red, the Soul Rager or whatever kind of missed. But like it is nice to give yourself outs, like to have a backup plan. And in a normal core set like this, they don't have that option, or at least they didn't give themselves that option. And so the misses do stand out. Right. One more thing I wanted to talk about, Paul, that we touched on during the Crack-a-Packs, but maybe we could expand on, were the toughness inflection points. Generally speaking, we kind of think of that magic toughness level in a set where having 1 extra point from there makes a huge difference. In this set, there's kind of 2 of them. If you had to pick one, it would be that 2 toughness, going to 3 toughness range because of what we've talked about with Burst Lightning and Stab. But the 1 toughness matters too, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think I am pretty low on, for example, a 2-mana 3/1, right? I'm just low on 1 toughness creatures in general, just because if you play against a black deck or a white deck, they're going to play their Infestation Sages, they're going to play Burglar Rat, and they're going to play Helpful Hunter. These are cards you're going to see very, very often. And when you play a Cathar Commando and you see one of those cards looking back at you, you're like, what? Why?
Why did I
put this card in my deck? Right.
Yeah.
There's also Prideful Parent. So I am trying to shy away from 1 toughness things as well. That Cathar Commando is still fine, right? It's flash. It's got some utility as well, but I just wouldn't want to play too many cards like that. For example, even a card like Mischievous Pup. I know it's an uncommon, but it's a 3-mana 3/1.
Yeah,
and
Wary
it's
Thespian.
Just been terrible for me because paying 3 mana for a 1 toughness creature that gets brickwalled by other 2 mana or 1 mana cards that generate you value just feels really, really bad. So that's another thing that I would look to avoid.
Yeah, Wary Thespian has been, again, at
least that surveils, but
right. You get it starts to approach the bar of acceptability, but it unfortunately falls short. Like it just would have been a 2/1 would have been, or 2/2 would have been way better. Because it isn't 4 power and it is 1 toughness, and it's just like you're 1 off on both of those as well. And then, as we've mentioned, and if you look at the especially the common creatures, and sort of put it under the filter of, does this have 2 mana or does this have 2 toughness or not? You will start to see some trends emerge there as well. Particularly, it doesn't have to be commons. I should just say any creatures. Because, one of the cards that you and I were talking about earlier today, before we started the show, was I don't remember what it's called, but it's the blue 4/2 flash flyer that gives all your other stuff flash or instant speed or whatever. Like those type of cards have plummeted for me. That's a totally fine card. Like it's a, a reasonable, it's a high fade trickster. It has a lot of interesting things going on. Blue has a ton of instants that you can play, card draw, counter spells, removal spells. So it has an interesting gameplay to it. But if you ever find yourself playing a game of Magic the Gathering where you play something that costs 4 and they play something that costs 1 that effectively, that kills it, you are going to have a tough time winning those games if you repeat that process. Once in a game is already going to put you on your heels tempo wise, especially if they can capitalize on it fully by like double spelling, like kill your 4-drop, play my own 4-drop with 5 mana on their turn. It's just a devastating swing for you. If they do it twice in a game, it's just over. Like there's no way you're recovering from that. So when I'm thinking about these things, I'm looking at them through that lens of there's 2 things. One, if I get something out of it right away, then it can be acceptable. Big Fin Bouncer, it has 2 toughness, but you feel like you're ahead if you bounce their 4-drop and then they use a burn spell on your bouncer. You're like, all right, sure, that'll work for me. The other types of cards that I'm looking at are cards like the Sky Mage, the one that grows when you draw a card.
Oh, the Klinquant.
Klinquant Sky Mage.
Yeah.
Perfect example of that. This is an interesting, cool card that could be a little bit of a build around, but also just sort of does its thing. You play it on 4 and by turn 6, it's like, okay, it's respectable. And if the game goes longer, it kind of becomes a dragon at some point. But
right.
4 mana, 1/1 flyer. And then they have a whole nother turn cycle to find their stupid burns, their 1 mana spell to kill it. And next thing you know, you've dumped 4 mana. And so these cards, again, just plummet for me. I am not interested in these type of cards. They just simply have too much liability attached to them.
Yeah, I mean, totally agree. This is just not a good format as well for vanilla big creatures. Mm-hmm. Just even if they're overstated, because the removal is just so good in this format, if you just take a look at kind of the best performing cards, they're all creatures that come into play to do something. They're like 2 mana, 1 mana, gives you some value, and they're all the removal spells. Those are the things that kind of top the list. So Shivan Dragon, not very good in this set, surprisingly, just because of how good the removal is. You pay 6 mana for a 5/5, and there's 5 or 6 different commons that kill it for less mana.
Yes.
Right? You just don't want to live in that world. Even a card like Serra Angel, which would be a bomb level card in some formats, is still good because white is very strong, but not as good because there's just lots of ways to answer that. So just not a good place to be. And going back to the 2 toughness thing, we maybe when we were going over the cards, I would probably take the Fairy over the Big Fin Bouncer. Now I'm just taking the Big Fin Bouncer.
Yeah. Give me something
if
now.
I have that pick again.
Yeah. It's what have you done for me lately, right? It's like, I need something now when these cards enter the battlefield. And I just looked up the Klinquant Sky Mage. Horrible.
50? 52?
48.5.
Oh man, that's bad.
Yeah. The only things worse than it on the uncommon blue list here is an offer you can't refuse, which I've refused every single time. And Sphinx's Tutelage, which I don't know if Sphinx's Tutelage is actually that bad. It just doesn't, it's one of the bonus sheet cards. So like there's not enough data on it basically. Yeah. So horrible. I mean, really, really bad. So keep that in mind too, as you're playing. And when you look at cards that you think look good at the surface or maybe had some potential, put them under the lens of what if my opponent killed this for 1 mana, how would I feel? And, if you're starting to get up into the creatures that cost 4 mana on your end and can die for 1 mana, well, I can tell you how you're going to feel. So there you go.
Great.
Okay. Great stuff, Paul. One last question for you before we take off. What do you think of the format just in general? Like, are you enjoying, like, this is definitely core set vibes. Like it feels way more stripped down than the prior set. How are you, is this a palate cleanser? Are you bored? What are you thinking?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, it's only been a week so far, so not bored just yet. But we'll note that a lot of the archetypes are very on rails, and there's not a lot of kind of overlapping archetypes, and you're not seeing a ton of people kind of playing 3-color decks. You're not seeing, just some weird build around decks either. So I feel like as far as replayability goes, for the hardcore drafters who like to go really deep and draft maybe 50 plus times, maybe you're not going to have as much fun on the 50th try. But I have been enjoying it so far, primarily just because I'm a blue mage, and I think blue is really strong in this format. And if you look at some of the data, that reflects that, because among top players, 3 of the top 4 archetypes are blue.
Oh God, it's right? Like our dream, Paul.
It is the dream in a world where Think Twice and Refute and Dismal Backwater are among the best commons in the set. That is everything I want in limited Magic. And if you take a look, I do these daily limited videos, and when I post that, I look back at it the other day and I was like, wow, I drafted Mir a lot.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I'm having similar feelings. To me, if I had to guess what we would say by the end of the set, based on what we've seen here, I would say they stuck the landing. They wanted core Magic gameplay. They wanted the colors to come through. They wanted it to feel like base level Magic. It totally does. It's still interesting. Drafting's still cool. There's still stuff to do. Thank God they put some of those like ambitious build arounds in the set. I'm already starting to go for those. Like I'm like, yeah, I get this other stuff.
I've lost to the dragon enchantment.
I played it last night, bro. I played it last night. I did. I played it. And then the turn that I untapped, I played, what is it called? Fleeting
Distraction.
Fleeting Distraction. Yeah. So that got me 2 of them. And then I played my splashed timely reinforcements. What is it called? Reinforcements. Heroic reinforcements, which gave all my dragons haste. I mean, it's so dumb because if you get to untap, it can get stupid. Yeah. But anyway, so yes, I think that they nailed it. I just think that there's a ceiling on sets like this. Yeah. That's it. Like, I think this is what you wanted. Like, I think if they made this more complicated, more interesting for the 50 plus draft crowd like us and our listeners, then they would have not nailed the other part. I just don't think you can have both. So I'm fine with it. I think it's good. Yeah. So far, I'm like actually pretty impressed by it, and I've been having fun with it. I'm definitely looking forward to doing an arena open on it. I am a little bit concerned about, say, late December, early January. Like, give me that vintage cube, or
holiday cube, baby.
Holiday cube might be in full effect by then, but yeah, I don't want it to be construed as a complaint, because I think that when you aim for getting this type of experience, you are explicitly saying, and therefore we don't want what we had in the last set where it was a really deep drafting gameplay experience. This is a little more accessible.
Yeah, I will say, Marshall, when I first heard about Foundations and what they were trying to accomplish, and then as we were kind of getting into doing the set reviews, I was a little concerned, just because obviously we got used to kind of more complex sets and we're used to deep draft formats. And I was thinking, man, I really hope they just don't print Grizzly Bear. You know what I mean? I was really concerned that it would be a little too simple, but that's not actually the case. I've actually enjoyed the gameplay. I've enjoyed drafting my decks. Maybe they could have powered up a few of the commons, because I'm sure you can agree. Sometimes you see some atrocious packs, and definitely. So I feel maybe it kind of feels like almost a core set draft in that instance. But the gameplays felt pretty good. The synergies for the most part seem to work, and I've just enjoyed the gameplay, and the decks seem to kind of work the way that you kind of anticipate when you draft. So I think this was a complete success, honestly, especially when you kind of match it to what they were trying to accomplish in the first place, right? They're not trying to, obviously it's really going to be hard to follow up Duskmourn, which is going to be kind of an all-timer. I think it's going to maybe go down as a top 5, top 10 type draft format, at least in recent memory, because you could just do so much. I drafted that set over 100 times, right? I don't foresee myself doing that here, but that doesn't mean the set's bad, right? It just means they had certain goals with this set, and I think they really nailed it.
I did too. So Let's see how long of a runway we get out of it. We'll be talking about it for a while at least to make sure that you're up to speed, dear listener, as you can, because we want you to win that money on the Arena Open and keep winning your drafts at your local game store and on Arena and Magic Online and everywhere else. So, these type of sets tend to be a real testament to the fact that limited and booster draft, just as a concept, as a format, as an activity, has so many layers and is so interesting that even if the cards themselves are meant to be more simple, that the idea behind booster draft still shines through. And so far, I found that to be the case for this set. We'll talk about it more in the upcoming ones. That's going to do it for this week. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Paul's Humph pretty much everywhere. You can find everything related to the podcast, excuse me, at lrcast.com. You can check out Paul's YouTube channel, Daily Draft Videos, if you want to watch Paul draft this set and get his thoughts in real time, both during the draft, during the deck build, I should say during the draft deck build, and during gameplay. You can follow along with him and he will explain to you what he's doing and why. And I'm telling you, there's a lot to be learned from that. I'll put a link to Paul's YouTube channel in the show notes and you can check that out there. New draft every day over on the Humph channel, and you're not going to want to miss it. We want to say thanks to our patrons as well as Ultimate Guard for supporting the show. And with that, we will see you next week. Okay, Paul, I'm on sign-off duty this week.
Okay.
And during our show prep, we were chatting with producer Jeff, and we realized you don't know what a spice bag is.
Yeah, you said something about a spice bag. I was like, what the hell is that?
It
sounds like it could be good.
Right, because then, it puts Jeff and I in a tough position of whether, like, leaving you in limbo. Like, we could refer to you as a spice bag. We could just call you names and you don't know if it's a compliment or not. You have no idea if it's like a descriptor, for bad behavior, or maybe it's like something that's really great. Like, oh, dude, you spice bag that thing, man. Like it means a great top deck. What it actually is, and let's just bring in producer Jeff to explain it.
Do you want to let him off the hook, Marshall?
No, yeah, I do.
Do I need to Google this?
I don't want to have
Google what a spice bag is.
I don't know what'll come up if you Google spice bag, but I know what Jeff told Luis and I a spice bag is, and it's a dish actually that apparently you can't get here in the States. Tell me more. Yeah. So what is it again, Jeff?
It's like the archetypical junk food, like equivalent to like something like Taco Bell or something like that. And what it comes from Chinese takeaway restaurants here, but like you would never find this food in China. And what it is like deep fried shredded chicken, fries.
Okay. Good start.
I'm in.
Did you hear what he said?
Usually,
fries.
Yes.
Yeah, fry. Yeah, I'm Americanizing the language.
Thank you.
Oh, you said fries, right?
He was going to say chips.
Yeah. Fries, usually some like token vegetables, so there'll be like some onion, often some red chilies, some like scallion, that kind of thing. Toss it. That's just token there, and then it's done in like a 5-spice and chili powder and like chili flakes mix. And that's more or less it. It is wonderful. Often served with like, I guess you'd call it like a curry gravy. We just call it curry sauce.
Is it in a bag? Do they give it to you in a bag?
It comes in like a brown bag. Like you might get like a 40-ounce in the States.
And then do you shake it up, Jeff? Like,
oh yeah. Well, no. The gravy comes in like a separate thing, so you can add it to a bowl and spread it all over. Or often people will just dip.
It sounds like the perfect meal after a night out.
Exactly.
Friday night. Right? It just seems like the perfect thing. Actually, what's funny is we had a very similar thing that we used to do when I lived in Curacao. Mm-hmm. It was there were these food trucks, and they would only come out like at night, really late at night, and you would go out there, and it would be lomito on skewers, which is basically beef on skewers, over a bed of French fries, and then just slathered in peanut sauce, and then they would have this thing on the side called pica, which is extremely spicy, pickled various peppers, and you put some on top. So you have some of that sweet from the
that sounds good.
The peanut sauce with the pica on top, with the lomito and the fries. It was great. Shout out.
Okay.
Shout out to those.
That sounds good.
But with the spice bag, what I see a lot on social media, just as kind of, I guess, a closing point, is it does seem to be becoming more global. And I've seen a lot of like food influencers and stuff doing like their own recreations of it, or trying to recreate for the sake of like seeing what all the hype is about. And many of them have been like, yeah, the hype is worth it. So if you ever get the opportunity, highly recommend.
Paul, so
I need a spice bag in my life.
We're gonna organize a trip to Ireland to visit Jeff and to get spice bags. It's happening. Me, you, and
that's
Luis.
going to be the first thing. Lock it in.
I'll see, can I find kids' portions?
What for who? Yeah.
No, for all Luis's kids.
No. This is me, Luis, and Paul. It's not the whole family.
Okay. Double portions for us.
Yeah.
Right. Sure. Yeah.